They had to be taken by Tuesday. That was what the sheriff said in the Cold Church Hall in Cold Creek, Montana, and what he meant was that no family in town would lay claim to 5 children who had no one left to claim them. He said it in a voice that was almost apologetic. Almost. The youngest, a 4-year-old named Sam, was sitting on the bench holding his brother Will's hand, and he did not understand that something had ended for him. Ruth, the eldest, had her arms around the smaller ones. Tom was 12 and looking at his boots. Annie was 10 and trying to smile as if the room were not getting smaller. The sheriff, Bunter Marsh, had his hat in his hands. Behind him, near the door, his hat still on, was Harlan Voss. Voss owned half the county and most of the bank. He had come to make sure the children left. He had not said so out loud. He didn't need to. The room already knew. It was a Tuesday night in February of 1882, and if you were listening tonight, if you were sitting somewhere with a kettle just come off the stove, or a quilt across your knees, or hands still in flour from a bread you set to rise, the cold in that church hall had a way of finding the parts of you that you thought you'd closed off. So before we go any further, I would like to know where you are. Tell me, in the comments, where you are tonight. I would like to know who is in the room with us. Outside, in the yard by the livery, a man named Wes Harding was unhitching a freight wagon that had come down from Helena. He was 42 years old and tired in a way that did not sleep off. 6 winters ago, he had carried his wife Sarah into the back room of a small cabin and had come out 2 days later without her, and he had been picking up the pieces of himself ever since. The son she had tried to leave him had lived 3 days. After that, there were no more children. He had thought, in the years since, that he was finished needing any. He had sold the cabin. He had bought a horse and a wagon and had stopped making plans that involved a second chair at a table. He was unhitching the traces when Annie Bird came running out of the church hall and ran straight into the leg of his horse. She sat down in the mud. She did not cry. She got back up. Wes stepped down from the wagon and steadied her by the shoulder and asked her, in the patient way a man with no children asks a child, what was the matter. "They're sending us away tomorrow," she said. Wes looked past her, through the open door of the hall. He could see Ruth, the oldest, with her arms around the smaller ones. He could see Sam, 4, holding a brother's hand. He could see the sheriff with his hat in his hands. He could see, behind the sheriff, a man in a clean wool coat whose boots had not touched the mud. "Who is that?" he said softly. "That's Mr. Voss. He wants our land." She said it without spite. She said it as a fact. Wes held her shoulder a moment longer. The town clock struck 8. He walked her back inside. He set her down beside Ruth. He put his hat in his hands. "Marsh," Wes said, "I'll take them." There was a silence. Then Harlan Voss laughed the kind of laugh a man laughs when he believes the joke is his alone. "Wes," he said, "you don't have a kitchen." "I know," Wes said. The girl Ruth looked up at him. Her eyes were older than she was. The question in them was one no one in this room was brave enough to ask out loud. Wes did not answer it. He did not have an answer yet. But he kept his hat in his hands, and he did not leave. That was the moment of no return. He just didn't know yet how far away no return really was. Her name was Clara Ellison, and she had walked into town that afternoon with a trunk and a carpet bag and a letter of appointment to teach the schoolhouse. She had lost her husband, a minister with bad lungs, 2 winters ago to a fever the doctor had not been able to name. She could not have children, and she had taken that as a settled fact. She had not, in the long years since, allowed herself to be surprised by anything. She sat on the church steps with her trunk beside her and waited for someone to come and find her, until Wes Harding walked up from the livery that Tuesday evening and tipped his hat without stopping. He had not said much, but the way he had not said much had a weight to it that Clara, who had spent 2 years listening to the silences of a dying man, recognized immediately. The next morning, Wes came back to the church hall. He had slept on a hay bale at the livery. He pushed the door open. Ruth was there, awake, with Sam half in her lap. "Get your brothers," he said. "I'm taking you home." She didn't argue. In 5 minutes they were outside in the cold, blinking at the sun that had not yet come over the hill. They had one wooden box between them, with 5 changes of clothes and a Bible with a cracked spine. Wes picked up the box. He started walking, and the children followed. As they came around the corner of the livery, they met Harlan Voss walking the other way. Voss had a folded paper in his hand. "Don't do this on an empty promise," Voss said. "It's not empty," Wes said. "It's just not full yet." The sheriff isn't going to be able to help you with the paperwork. Then I won't need the sheriff's paperwork. Voss tipped his hat to the children and walked on. They walked together to the line camp cabin at the head of Cold Creek, where Wes had been putting up frayed animals for 10 winters. It was a rough place. 2 rooms, a stove with a cracked door, a porch with a hole in the floor. Wes set the wooden box down on the kitchen table. He put water on. He made a small pan of biscuits and divided them among the children. Some things you do not do because you are ready. You do them because the room is small and the children are hungry and you are the only one standing. It was at the end of that week that the trouble came, in the form of a letter. The letter bore the seal of the Territorial Bank. Wes opened it on Saturday. He read it twice. It said, in plain language, that 4 winters ago, when Wes had been sick from a fall, he had signed a paper with a man named Cobb, and that Cobb had since sold his interest to Voss, and that if Wes did not maintain a certain number of head on the adjoining range through the winter season, the cabin reverted to the grantee. There were 21 days until the reversion. Wes did not remember signing it. He had not been entirely himself that winter. Clara had come up the creek that morning. She watched from inside the kitchen window as Wes read the letter the second time. She watched him put his hand flat on the table, palm down, the way a man does when he is holding something down inside himself. When Sam climbed onto the chair beside him and put his small hand over the letter as if to smooth it out, Wes's breath caught. He picked Sam up. He set him on his hip. "Sam," he said, very quietly, "I need to mend a roof today. Will you hand me nails?" From the doorway, Clara knocked. "Wes," she said, "I've come to ask you something." "Ask. Are you intending to keep them?" "Yes, ma'am." "Is the cabin yours?" "Mostly." "What do you mean, mostly?" He looked out at Tom and was bringing water up from the pump in a bucket so heavy they had to hold it between them. "It means I have a problem." "Do you want help with the problem?" "I don't know you, ma'am." "You don't need to," she said. "You need a teacher. And I need a reason to stay. That is enough." She set her carpetbag down on the porch. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, "I am going to be in some trouble in this town. I'd like you not to be in it with me." "Yes," she said. "I'm staying." He thought of Sarah. He thought of the 3 days. He thought of how often in his life he had failed at the thing he had set out to do. He had been, for 6 years, a man without a knot to tie. He had one now. He had 20 days. He had, in his pocket, $14. He had a wagon that needed an axle. He had a rifle. He had the lopsided loyalty of a girl of 14 who had watched her brothers and sister for 2 winters and held them together with her arms. And if you have ever been the only one standing in a room that wanted someone to fall away, you know what I am about to ask you. Have you ever said yes before you understood what yes would cost? Put your answer in the comments, if you would. I will read it on Tuesday. By Monday, the news was in town that the cabin would revert to the bank on Voss's behalf. The sheriff came on Thursday with a copy of the paper, which he read out loud on the porch. His voice caught twice. "How long have I?" Wes said. 21 days, Marsh said. "And the children?" "The children will go where the children were always going to go," Marsh said. "I'm sorry, Wes. I tried." Wes nodded. "I know you did." He set Sam down on the porch. He walked inside. He sat down at the kitchen table. He put his hands together, palm to palm. Clara was standing at the stove with flour on her hands. 21 days, he said. She nodded. "How many of these children," he said, "do you believe would survive another winter with no kin?" She did not answer him for a long time. She set a biscuit down in front of him. "All of them," she said, "if you fight for them." "I'm not sure I know how to fight for them." "Then learn." He rode down to Voss's office. Voss sat behind a desk that was wider than most kitchen tables in Cold Creek. "Wes, I'm going to be plain. The paper is a paper. The children will be parceled out. There is no malice. There is only land." "You mean water?" Wes said. Voss paused. There was a spring at the back of the line camp property. Voss had known about it for years. He had not been able to get at it. The cabin was the lock on the door to the spring. "Then don't," said Wes. "I'm staying." Voss set his whiskey down. He smiled the smile of a man who thought time was on his side. "I'll see you in 21 days, Voss said. Wes walked out into the cold. He had made a man take him seriously for the first time in his life. He had 20 days. He had $13. He mended the roof. He cut wood. He walked the property line in the snow. He found the spring on the 3rd day, up behind the cabin, under a stand of alder. The water ran cold and clear and did not freeze all the way through the year. He thought of his father, who had been a freighter, and how his father had always said the only wealth worth having was the kind you could drink. He walked back down to the cabin and told Ruth he might have made a mistake. He had not, he told her, made a mistake. He had made a discovery. If those waters were tested, the cabin's value would be different. It was not a magic spring. It was just a spring. But in that winter, in that town, it was enough. He spent the next 3 days writing letters he had never written before. To the Territorial Land Office. To a water engineer in Helena. To a judge in Butte he had once carried freight for. He wrote them on the kitchen table, by lantern light, while Sam played with a tin of buttons at his feet. On the morning of the 11th day, he stood at the post office window and put them on the counter. In the middle of the night, Sam woke with a fever. He was shaking. Wes carried him to the kitchen and held him against his shoulder by the stove. Clara sat on the floor beside them and counted his breaths. "We need a doctor," she said. "The doctor is 20 miles down the creek. Then we need to go get him." "I'll go. You stay with Sam." He rode out at 1 in the morning in snow that was coming sideways. Doc Marsh, the sheriff's brother, came anyway. The boy had a winter sickness that turned lungs into leather if left alone. He would live if there was someone to keep him upright for the next 5 days. Clara sat up with Sam that night. Wes sat up on the porch with his rifle across his knees, in case anyone from town thought a sick child was a good reason to press him about the paper. He sat there until dawn. In the morning, Sam's fever broke. Clara put her hand on the boy's head and said nothing, and Wes walked back into the house and sat down on the kitchen settle and did not move for an hour. On the morning of the 12th day, Wes walked into town. He walked into the sheriff's office. "Marsh," he said, "I'm asking for a hearing. This will be a public hearing, Wes. There will be a judge. There will be Voss. I have asked for 1 and 1, not 2. There will be Harlan Voss," Marsh said. "You have asked for everything else." There was, in the corner of Marsh's voice, a small, almost inaudible thread of something that might have been respect. It was the first time Wes had heard it from any man in Cold Creek. On the morning of the 21st day, the judge came. The hearing was held in the church hall. The children were there again, sitting on the same bench. Wes was in his only good coat. Clara was there, with chalk still on her hands. Harlan Voss was there, with a lawyer beside him whose name was longer than his client's fortune. The paper was read. Wes testified, plainly, that the cabin had been his alone for 10 winters, that 5 children had been living under his roof, and that if there was a spring on the property, he was prepared to have the water surveyed. There was a silence in the room. Voss's lawyer stopped writing. "There is no spring on that property," Voss said. "My testimony, sir," Wes said, "is that there is." The judge took off his glasses and put them back on. "This hearing is held in recess until the surveyor reports." Voss stood up. He buttoned his coat. He walked out without a word. Wes had been, his whole life, a man who said nothing in rooms full of men who said everything. He had tied the knot. He had held it. Now he was seeing who would tighten it next. He walked home through the snow. He walked ahead of the children, because he was the only one in the line who knew how far that promise might run. The surveyor came 6 weeks later. His name was William Pell. He was 68 years old. He had measured water for 40 years. On the morning he was to ride up the creek, Wes was up before dawn. He set the kettle for Clara. He watched her sleep for a moment. He walked out to the porch. Sam was awake. Sam had been the most inclined to climb into Wes's lap, as if he were a piece of furniture. Wes picked him up. Sam put his head on Wes's shoulder. "Pap," Sam said. It was not a word Wes had been expecting. He felt his chest go hard. He felt his eyes sting. He felt the inside of him shift, the way the ground shifts when a spring opens up underneath it. He sat down on the porch. He held Sam tighter. "Yeah," Wes said finally, into the boy's hair. "Yeah." After a while, Clara came out. She had been standing inside the door, listening. She handed him a mug. Their fingers touched on the handle. "He called me Pap," Wes said. "I heard," she said. "You don't have to say anything. You can just stand there." He stood there. He drank the coffee. He thanked her for the coffee. She went back in and made breakfast. Then William Pell came. He went up behind the alder. He measured the spring. He got down on his hands and knees and tasted the water. He came back to the porch and sat on the step. "This spring has been running since before there was a town here," he said. "It is clean. It is good. There are men who would give a great deal for this water." "I know," Wes said. "What do you want me to write in my report?" "I want you to write what you have seen," said Wes. And I want you to understand that I am not asking for the spring to be mine. I am asking for it to be the children's. Pell sat back. For a freight driver, you are an unusual man. I'm not a freight driver anymore, said Wes. In the weeks that followed, Wes did not go to town to receive any congratulations. He could have. He let it pass. He went on with his work. He watched Tom teach Will to throw a hitch knot. He watched Sam put the tin of buttons in order by size and color. He lifted Annie up to a branch of the apple tree. Clara noticed, from the kitchen window, when she stood watching him with flour on her hands. She understood that Wes would not insist the town notice him. He called Ruth to the porch one evening. He had the surveyor's report folded in his hand. Listen to me, he said. This paper is yours. It is just a paper, but it says that this land, and this water, and this house will be yours when you are old enough to read it. Ruth took the paper. She held it against her chest with both hands. Will they take it from us? She said. No, Wes said. I will not let them take it. She nodded. She set the box under her bed. She looked up at Wes. It was the look of someone who had not trusted a man in years, and who had just decided to trust one. Thank you, sir, she said. Thank your brothers, he said. Tom carried water. Annie did not cry. Sam said a word out loud I did not know I had in me. Clara came to the door. She had heard. They're going to be all right, Wes, she said. Yes, he said. I think they are. She went inside and came back out with the quilt. She sat on the step beside him. I have not been all right for 2 winters, she said. I did not know until this minute that I was going to be all right again. He looked at her sidewise. You are good at being sat beside, Miss Clara. She set her shoulder against his. He set his shoulder against hers. He knew only that this step, with this quilt, with this woman, with this paper under this girl's bed, was the first time in 6 winters that he had sat anywhere without wanting to get up. If you've ever been sat beside the way Clara sat beside Wes tonight, you already know what I'm asking you to do. The like right where you're sitting would not be wasted on this story. And if you've been the one who could not say thank you out loud for 6 winters, well, you know who you are. Subscribe if you'd like to come back next week. We will sit together again. It was in the second spring that Harlan Voss came back up the creek. He had a glass jar and a length of string. He was going to take a sample to a man in Virginia City who tested waters for silver camps. He did not. He stood with the jar in his hand and did not fill it. He heard, behind him, the sound of children. Annie was at the apple tree. Tom was mending the fence below the hill. Sam was on the porch, dragging a tin of buttons in a small wagon. Clara was at the schoolhouse end of the porch, teaching them sums. Wes was in the yard, singing a low song that was not a song anyone outside this house had ever heard. Voss watched them for a long time, but his shoulders were not as straight. He set the empty jar on the fence post. He walked back down to his buggy. He wrote, the next morning, a letter to the Territorial Land Office that withdrew his claim to the cabin and to the spring, with no conditions attached. He sold his interest in the line camp property back for a quarter of what he had paid. He did not move away. He did not, however, ever come up the creek again. There was something about the porch and the apple tree and the small tin wagon that he could not, in his own reckoning, afford to look at twice. The town noticed. The town, in the way towns notice, began to call the cabin the Harding place. Wes went on mending fences and listening to Tom read out loud from the cracked Bible, which had been rebound by the county librarian. Clara had, by the 3rd spring, 17 pupils. She was the best teacher the town had ever had, and the worst paid. She wrote the children's letters home to nobody, which she kept in a tin box on the kitchen shelf with the cracked Bible on top. Wes married her on a Saturday in May. There was no party. There was a meal. There were the 5 children in clean clothes. There was the sheriff, who for once brought his harmonica. There was Doc Marsh, who had not particularly liked Wes a year ago, and who now understood he was one of the few people Wes would have over for supper. There was William Pell, who had come down from Helena with his wife. There was Harlan Voss's lawyer, who had come anyway on his own and wanted to leave a bottle of whiskey on the kitchen table without saying who had left it. It is 6 winters on. The cabin has a new roof and a 3rd room. The smoke comes out of the chimney in the same curl it always did. There is a porch with no hole in it. There are, on the inside of the front door, the names of 10 children scratched into the wood by small fingers that have grown up. There is a man on the porch, with a quilt over his shoulders that his wife brought out because he forgets the cold. He has, in his own long way, built a place worth staying in. They had not been saved by anything grand. They had been saved by a man who could not say the word stay out loud, but never once stopped building a place worth staying in. Tomorrow night, a woman comes home to a house she does not recognize and finds her own name written on a gravestone she never saw being made. If you'd like to sit with her for a while, I will leave the door open for you. Until then, good night. Stay warm.